Okay, let's unpack this. It sounds almost like science fiction, doesn't it? Knowing the actual color of a dinosaur.
It really does, but we're talking 160 million years ago.
And not just guessing, I mean knowing. Forget those dusty gray skeletons you see.
Exactly. We're talking vivid color, patterns,
Hmm.
all thanks to some incredible fossil finds and some very clever analysis. We're
Yeah.
basically looking at pigment traces preserved for millions of years.
It's amazing. And the star of our deep dive today is this creature, Anchiornis huxleyi, a small, kind of bird-like dinosaur from China, late Jurassic.
Right, 4 wings, feathers.
It's a fascinating one.
We've got a stack of scientific papers here, analyses of these amazing fossils. And our mission, for you, the learner listening in, is to really pull out the key stuff about Anchiornis.
Yeah, what did it look like? What was it doing? And crucially, where does it fit in the whole dinosaur to bird story?
We're hunting for those aha moments, the things that make you go, wow, okay.
And the name itself, Anchiornis, actually tells you a lot. It means near bird.
Yeah, and Huxley honors Thomas Henry Huxley. He was one of the first, way back, to really champion the idea that birds evolved from dinosaurs.
Near bird. That sets the stage perfectly. So these fossils,
Mm-hmm.
where did they actually find them?
The main spot is the Tiajishan Formation in Liaoning, China. It's late Jurassic, like we said, about 160 million years old.
Mm-hmm.
The very first one turned up in the Yalagu area.
Just wanted to start.
Well, yeah, but then they found more, lots more, hundreds actually from that same formation.
Hundreds. Seriously.
Yeah, it's pretty unusual. And that's why we know so much about Anchiornis. It gives us this unprecedented look at its life appearance, far more detailed than for most dinosaurs from that time.
That volume must make a huge difference compared to just having one or two bones.
Oh, absolutely. You see variation, maybe different growth stages, and you can confirm things. Like there was a second specimen, much more complete, found by a farmer nearby.
Okay.
That one, LPMB 000169, it clearly showed long feathers, not just on the arms, but on the legs and feet too.
Ah, the four-wing evidence.
Exactly. Confirmed it was a 4-winged dinosaur, kind of like Microraptor. It really boosted that idea, a sort of Catraptorix stage in early bird evolution.
Four wings.
Yeah.
It's just such a wild image. Did other finds add more pieces?
Definitely. There's a key specimen at the Beijing Museum of Natural History, BMNHC PH828. Almost complete, just missing the tail.
That one was special, how?
Incredible feather preservation. You could even see hints of maybe a feathered crest on its head. And crucially, this was the one they used for the first big color study.
The color breakthrough, right? Any others worth mentioning?
Well, yeah. There's one at the Yuzu Fossil and Geology Park, YTGPT 5199. They used scanning electron microscopy on its feathers, studied the microstructure.
And did that confirm the Beijing one?
Interestingly, no, not exactly. It mainly showed evidence for gray-black pigments, which, raises questions. Was it preservation differences? Maybe the animals changed color as they aged, or different populations, or maybe even different species. Science in action, right?
There's more questions.
Always. And then there's the Shandong Tianyu Museum of Nature. Apparently they have something like 255 Anchiornis specimens.
255.
Yeah, including some showing color patterns. It's just this massive resource for researchers.
Wow. Okay, so with all that material, let's build a picture. What did this near bird actually look like, size-wise?
Think small, like crow-sized, basically. The first one found, likely a youngster, was maybe 34 centimeters long, only about 110 grams.
Tiny.
Yeah, but adults were bigger, maybe 60, 62 centimeters long, wingspan around 57 centimeters, and maybe weighing up to a kilogram. So bigger than a crow, but still pretty small for a dinosaur.
And its general shape, body plan.
It's a bipedal theropod, walked on 2 legs, part of that meat-eating dinosaur group that leads to birds, had a sort of triangular skull, shared features with dromaeosaurs, troodontids, those small, fast, feathered dinos, but also with the very earliest birds, the aviolans.
And covered in feathers, you said.
Oh, yeah. Mostly covered in feathers, though it did still have scales on some parts, like the feet.
Feathers and scales together. Classic transition. What kind of feathers?
A mix. It had downy feathers, probably 2 types, likely for warmth. Then it had veined feathers, the kind with the central stalk, like modern flight feathers on its wings, legs, and tail.
So proper wings.
Well, structures like wings. It also had long, simpler feathers on its head, neck, body, upper legs, and the front half of the tail. The back half of the tail had more typical pennaceous veined feathers, and maybe that feathered crest on the head we mentioned.
A bit of a mohawk, maybe?
Could be. Maybe for display.
You mentioned its plumage looked shaggy. What's that about?
Yeah, the feathers weren't quite like modern bird feathers. They had short quills, but the barbs, the little strands coming off the quill, were long, flexible and kind of independent. They came off at a shallow angle, giving each feather a sort of forked look.
Okay.
So the overall effect would have been softer, fluffier, less smooth, and aerodynamic than a modern bird's coat.
So less good for flying, maybe more for warmth.
That's the thinking. Thermoregulation, maybe display, probably came before sophisticated flight. The shaggier structure likely wasn't great at generating lift or being particularly water repellent.
Right, so even though it had these wing-like things on arms and legs, flight might not have been the main job. Let's focus on those forewings.
Okay, so the forewings were pretty big. 11 primary feathers on the hand, 10 secondaries on the forearm. But the shape was different from later flyers.
How so?
Rounded. The longest feathers were near the wrist, not the wingtip. Microraptor and Archaeopteryx, they had more pointed wings. This rounded shape usually means, well, poorer aerodynamics, less efficient for flight.
Anything else unusual about the wing structure?
It had a skin flap, a postpatagium running from the wrist to the shoulder,
Mm-hmm.
covered in small feathers, coverts, probably to smooth airflow. But the coverts themselves were weird.
Weird how?
Multiple layers, overlapping quite a bit, covering a lot of the wing. Modern birds usually just have one main layer. Maybe this multi-layer thing added some stiffness to wings made of relatively weak feathers.
Could be.
And another thing, it had 3 fingers with claws, but the 2 longest ones seemed to have been bound together by skin. So functionally, it was more like a 2-fingered wing.
2 fingers.
Yeah, effectively. And those fingers were thick and scaly, actually quite similar to another feathered dinosaur called Caudipteryx.
Scaly fingers inside a feathered wing. What a mix. Okay, what about the hind legs? The hind wings. Feathers on legs seems odd.
It is odd from a modern perspective. Anchiornis had really long legs, which usually suggests running ability, but then they're covered in these long, veined feathers, forming hind
It
wings.
seems contradictory, right? Long running legs, but feathers that might get in the way.
Exactly. It's a puzzle. The best guess is that those hindwing feathers were mainly for show, visual display, attracting mates, maybe species recognition, rather than producing much lift for flight or gliding.
Display seems to be popping up a lot. What were the legs and feet like underneath the feathers?
Well, the bones suggest a decent runner. 4 toes, 3rd and 4th longest. The big toe, the hallux, wasn't reversed like in perching birds. And yeah, the feet, except the claws, were covered in shorter feathers.
Feathers right down to the toes.
Pretty much. Though some fossils show tiny scales under the feathers on the toes and lower leg bones. And the undersides of the toes had fleshy pads, like a dog or cat, covered in little pebble-like scales for grip.
So built for walking or running, but dressed up with leg feathers. Fascinating. Let's get back to the color. That 2010 study was huge, right?
Yeah.
How did they actually figure out the colors?
It was groundbreaking. They looked at the fossilized feathers from that Beijing specimen under powerful microscopes. They found preserved melanosomes, tiny structures inside cells that contain melanin pigment.
Like the stuff that gives us hair and skin color.
Exactly the same principle. By looking at the shape, size, and arrangement of these fossil melanosomes, they could figure out what colors they would have produced. Eumelanin for blacks and grays, pheomelanin for reddish-browns and yellows.
And what was the result? What did Anchiornis look like?
It was pretty spectacular, mostly gray and black body feathers, but it had this striking rufous-like reddish-brown crest or crown on its head with some gray at the base and front. Rufous speckles on the face, too.
Nice. What about the wings?
The main flight feathers on both the forewings and hindwings were white, but they had black tips. And the covert feathers covering the base of the wings were gray, creating this pattern of darker spots or stripes against the white.
Wow, very patterned.
Yeah, and the lower legs, the shanks, were gray, apart from the long hindwing feathers themselves, and the feet and toes were black.
That's incredibly specific. Sounds like a modern bird.
Yeah.
Almost. But you mentioned another study found something different.
Right, that 2015 study on the yuzu fossil. They looked for melanosomes too, but they only found the type associated with gray and black colors, even in areas where the Beijing specimen had red.
Huh. So what does that mean? Was the first study wrong?
Not necessarily wrong. It could be a few things. Maybe pigment preservation was just different in that fossil. Taphonomy, you know, how things fossilize. Or maybe younger Anchiornis were colored differently than adults. Or maybe populations in slightly different areas had different colors. Or maybe they weren't exactly the same species.
So the jury's still out on the exact details for all individuals.
A little bit. It shows science isn't static. New data comes in, you refine the picture, you ask more questions. It's a process.
Definitely. Okay, let's shift to the big picture. Where does Anchiornis fit in the grand scheme of evolution? Its classification has been kicked around a bit, hasn't it?
Oh, yeah. When it was first found, because it had feathers and looked quite bird-like, they thought it was an early aviolon. You know, part of the group that includes modern birds, putting it close to Archaeopteryx.
Made sense at the time.
Sure, but then as they studied it more, some analyses suggested maybe it was actually closer to the Troodontids, another group of small, smart, feathered dinosaurs.
Okay, shifting branches.
Exactly. Other studies put it back near Archaeopteryx in a family called Archaeopterygidae, or even in its own group, the Tetrapterigidae, sort of alongside the main bird line, but not directly on it.
So, a bit confusing for a while. What's the consensus now, more or less?
The most common view now is that Anchiornis is a basal paravian. Paraves is the big group containing dromaeosaurids like velociraptor, troodontids, and aviolans, birds. Anchiornis seems to sit near the base of that whole radiation, just branching off before those three main groups split.
So, not a direct ancestor of birds, but a very close cousin. An aunt or uncle, maybe?
Something like that. More recently, like in 2017, analyses put it firmly in its own family. Anchiornithidae, along with a couple of other similar feathered dinosaurs like Eosinopteryx and Shaotingia.
Okay, so Anchiornithidae, a key side branch right near the origin of birds.
Precisely. Its mix of primitive dinosaur features and advanced bird-like traits makes it super important for understanding that transition. It's a snapshot of evolution happening.
And those features must tell us something about how it lived. It's paleobiology. Those long arms and bird-like wrists made people think about flight early on, right?
They did. The forelimbs were long, proportionally about 80% of the hind limb length, which is in the bird range. And the wrist could bend in a way that's important for a flight stroke. But
Look.
the wings themselves, as we said, were shortish, rounded, and the main feathers were symmetrical. Flight feathers in good flyers are usually asymmetrical. That suggests its aerodynamics weren't great.
So probably not flapping powerfully through the skies.
Probably not sustained flight. A 2016 study suggested maybe young ones could use their wings to help run up slopes, wing-assisted incline running, or wear, like some modern birds do, or maybe get short bursts of flapping.
Like clumsy fluttering.
Kind of, but the adults were likely too heavy for that to provide much lift. Maybe flapping helped them run a bit faster, or leap higher or further. It also might not have had a bony sternum, a breastbone, to anchor big flight muscles. It might have been cartilage.
Ah, okay. So limited flight potential at best. What about the running? Those long legs.
Yeah, the leg bones definitely point to it being a capable runner on the ground. And its hind claws weren't super curved like you see in animals that climb trees a lot, so likely terrestrial.
But the leg feathers still seem like a drag, literally.
They do. It's still a bit weird. The hind wings probably weren't for running efficiency. Again, display seems the most likely primary function. It's interesting, too, that Anchiornis lived alongside Eosinopteryx, another feathered dinosaur that probably couldn't fly well either. Maybe they specialized differently. Anchiornis more on the ground.
Different niches in the same environment. Makes sense.
Oh.
And the colors, you mentioned display, but what else?
Communication, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Those complex patterns, the contrasts, they scream, "Look at me!" Just like modern birds use plumage for attracting mates, defining territory, maybe warning signals, the specific patterns could have meant different things.
Social signaling 160 million years ago. Cool. What did it eat? Do we know?
We actually do. Some fossils were found with gastric pellets.
Pellets. Like an owl.
Exactly like an owl pellet. Regurgitated lumps of indigestible stuff. And these pellets contain tiny lizard bones and fish scale.
Wow. Direct evidence.
Yeah. And it tells us Anchiornis had already evolved that bird-style digestion, compacting and ejecting the bits it couldn't digest. That's pretty advanced for a non-avian theropod.
So let's sum up. We've got this small, fast-running, ground-dwelling dinosaur covered in feathers, including 4 wings, probably used more for display than flight, complex coloration for communication, and a bird-like digestive system. It really is a creature caught right in the middle of a major evolutionary shift.
That's the perfect way to put it. And that's the core takeaway for you, the learner. Anchiornis gives us this incredibly detailed snapshot. It shows how complex that dinosaur-to-bird transition was, revealing things like color, feather function. It's not just about bones.
Yeah, the aha moment for me is definitely that mix of seemingly contradictory features. Running legs, but leg feathers. Wings, but not great for flying. It shows evolution isn't this neat straight line. It's messy, trying different things out.
Exactly. Features evolve for one reason, then get co-opted for another. It's intricate.
Which leads to a final thought, maybe. Given how much detail we've squeezed out of Anchiornis,
Mm,
thanks to amazing fossils and new techniques, what else don't we know?
right. What other evolutionary stories that we think are settled might have these kinds of surprising twists waiting to be discovered?
Makes you wonder what the next big find will reveal, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It really highlights how science constantly revises our understanding as new evidence comes to light.